These are the notes for section 4.1, congruent triangles. The objectives are I will be able to name and label corresponding parts of congruent triangles. First off, we have to say what congruent triangles are. Congruent triangles are triangles that have 3 congruent pairs of sides and angles. So in congruent triangles, corresponding angles and corresponding sides are congruent. So that's pretty much the definition of congruent triangles. What we mean by corresponding sides are the sides that have 1 tick mark each. So I see 1 tick mark between segment BA. So the corresponding sides, I would say segment BA is congruent to this segment right here. I would call this segment SR. The reason why I would do that is because S has 2 angle marks next to it, and so does B, so I want to keep that notation the same. That would be an example of a corresponding angle. Do you see how B has 2 angle marks, S has 2 angle marks, so I would say angle B is congruent to angle S. The same thing with everything with 2 segment marks. I would say segment CA is congruent to segment TR. So I have 1 angle mark on A and 1 angle mark on R. So let's say angle A is congruent to angle R. And lastly, I have 3 tick marks on CB. So segment CB is congruent to the other segment with 3 tick marks, segment TS. So I have angle C, 3 angle marks, congruent with angle T. So whenever I write a congruent statement, I'm going to erase this so I can get a better idea of where all of my angle marks are. For a congruent statement, it says A, B, C. Well, A has 1 angle mark, B has 2, C has 3. So I want to go in that same order. I want to go 1, which is R, so it's triangle R. Then the angle with 2 angle marks, S. Finally, the one with 3, T. So that's how we would write a congruent statement. The order is very important here. It's going to be important throughout this chapter and the next unit when we talk about similar triangles. So CAB, we kind of go 3, 1, 2. See how many angle marks I have? So I want to go 3, 1, 2. That's going to be triangle TRS. And then I go BCA. B is 2, 3, 1. So I want to go 2, 3, 1, which is triangle STR. So we have a couple examples down here. It says, name the corresponding angles and sides of the pair of triangles. State the congruent statement also. So you want to use the same thing as above. You want the corresponding sides, the corresponding angles, and the congruent statement. So I want you to try numbers 1 and 2. Moving on to the back page, it says find the value of x if triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. So in order to do this, we have to make sure that the angles are congruent. So the first letter is A and D, so those will both have 1 angle mark. The second letters are B and E, so those are both right angles. And I know that angle C has to be congruent with angle F. So what is angle C? Well, to find angle C, I just do 180 minus 90 minus 57, because remember, all three angles in this triangle that I'm highlighting have to add up to 180. So I'm going to erase everything to make things a little bit more clear. Whenever I do that, I get 33 degrees. So angle C is 33 degrees. So since I said C is equal to F, 33 has to equal 6x plus 3. When I subtract 3, 30 is equal to 6x. And lastly, I divide by 6. I get x is equal to 5. And again, the direction said find the value of x, so that's what it is. You should be able to try number 4. I'll get you started on number 4. We know that A and D have to be the same. Again, the first two letters, so this is 102 degrees. Then to find angle C, remember everything needs to add up to 180. So we have 180 minus 36 minus 102. So whenever we do that, we get 42 degrees. So that's how you get that one started. So we have a couple properties of congruent triangles. They are reflexive, symmetric, and transitive. So determine whether the following pairs of triangles are congruent and why. You must justify all congruent corresponding parts given the congruent statement. So again, the directions: determine whether the following pairs of triangles are congruent and why. You must justify all congruent corresponding parts, and finally give the congruent statement. So let's see, do these angles, are they the same thing? These triangles, are they congruent? So we're told G is the midpoint of EJ and HF. So even before I saw that, right away I saw vertical angles, and that's why I highlighted them in red. So number 5, again, G is the midpoint of EJ and HF. So if it's the midpoint, that means that EG is congruent to GJ by definition of midpoint. And we also know segment FG is congruent to segment GH by definition of, I'm going to abbreviate it, MP midpoint. So I have all three sides are congruent. So I have segment EG is congruent to segment GJ. I'll rewrite this because E is 58 and J is 58, so JG would be better notation. I know that segment FG is congruent to segment HG. And I also know from my given information that segment FE is congruent to segment HJ. We didn't say why for this. This is just given information. It was already on my diagram. So in terms of the angles, I know that angle EGF, that's the one that I highlighted in red, is congruent to angle JGH by vertical angles. I also know that angle E is congruent to angle J because this was given information. So whenever we have two angles are the same in two different triangles, I know that the third angle, angle F, is going to be congruent to angle H. We know this because they both have to add up to 180, so 58 plus whatever that vertical angle is, plus angle F need to equal 180, and 58 plus the vertical angle plus whatever angle H is has to equal 180. So we call this the third angles theorem. We'll talk more about this in class, but again, it's just whenever we have two angles are the same, the third one also has to be the same. So we justified everything. We finally have to give the congruent statement. So I'm really running out of room here, so I'm going to write it in the bottom left here. I'm going to say triangle EGF is congruent to triangle. So E was the same as J, G is the same as G, and F was the same as H. That's how I make sure that everything's in the same position. So that's how we solve number 5. Let's do number 7 together on this video. So number 7, we're given a lot of information. So everything that I'm going to put in black is given to us. We're given that ED is congruent to PR. CD, that has 3 marks, is congruent to QR. And lastly, EC is congruent to PQ. All 3 of those things are given to us. And we're also given that angle E is congruent to angle P. So are the angles equal? Well, remember, both of these triangles, the interior angles have to add up to 180. So I have 120, 20, and 40 adds up to 180. 120, 40, and 20 adds up to 180. So whenever I do that, I know angle C is congruent to angle Q, and that angle D is congruent to angle R. I got these two by the interior angle sum of triangles. So now I'm ready to write a congruent statement. I can write triangle ECD. This is probably the easiest one because I already have ECD. It's going to be congruent to triangle PQR. Becomes very easy whenever we list the angles like that, especially when there's one letter involved. If you can, try number 6.